As consumer expectations continue to soar, the retail landscape evolves to not just meet, but exceed them. Today's retail spaces are more than transactional locales. They are immersive environments that embody the narrative of a brand, narratives that need to both captivate and resonate. Welcome back to the Phygital Lab, our second episode, the forum where we attempt to dissect this sort of evolving tapestry of retail, blending digital innovation with palpable human connection. This second episode, titled Thinking Differently to Meet Rising Expectations, takes us into the minds of those reinventing retail. And today we're going to be joined by Tim Nash, the strategic thinker behind the incredible Shop Drop Daily and pioneer of some real engaging real-world brand experiences. With an acute understanding of the retail revolution acquired over the last sort of 2 decades, Tim brings us insights into the creation of spaces where engagement, aspiration converge, crafting experiences that endure well beyond the storefront, which is what we're interested in. Tim, we're excited to have you share your expertise with us here at the Phygital Lab, so welcome. Before we dive into retail engagement, could you briefly share with us what was the last book or publication that you read, why you chose it, and the impact it left?
Well, thanks. What a great introduction. So now I have to live up to that with a great book. And it's funny because for someone I love consuming, but I really struggle to read. I'm a sort of 15-minute reader, so I love snippets of information. So whether that's newspaper, I love like the Sunday papers because they can last all week. So I've always been a kind of consumer of very short form content. But what I'm reading at the moment is a book called Curation. I've sort of fallen back in love with the library, and that's really, I don't know if that's really sad to say, but I've got 2 daughters and they're big into books, but we've sort of recently joined the local library, and I sort of just go in there and try and find a book that I think might sort of tickle my fancy. And it's stuff that I have to be really in tune with. There was a couple of retail books I've read recently. I think the one that obviously, and it's so cliche, but that the Shoe Dog, the book about Nike is an inspirational book for me. I'm very visual, so I like books that have content that I can sort of consume in short form. So yeah, it's kind of an anti against long form. I don't get lost in books. Maybe that's because I have this. I'm a sort of consumer. I love content, and I don't know if that's good or bad. That sort of over time sort of happened, and I suppose that's part of what I do in a day job as well, like Shop Drop and things. Is all about how can I consume, and that's probably where my love of what retail has come a point of. So it's funny that books versus kind of like newspapers. I'm definitely the Sunday papers, but they're not even the Sunday papers. The Sunday papers that are probably still in my house are from like 4 weeks ago. So it's not even about like up to date news. Like I'll read the paper from cover to cover, even the sort of obituaries at the back. It's really weird. So it's really interesting.
But it's interesting, and the sort of tapestry behind you probably gives us a bit of an insight into probably how your mind consumes content, and I think things like the Sunday paper, which is well, let's call it factual based, or at least it's somewhat subjective, isn't it? But let's call it factual based. But I totally understand, and I've not read Curation, and I've also not read the book that Nike wrote. Both of those, I think I'm probably going to look up after we finish this, but it must be something related to that. I wonder if there's some kind of correlation between when you've got strategic creative thinkers such as yourself and the way that they like to consume in sort of bite-sized things. It's all very visual, very inspirational, and I wonder if there's a correlation or a theme there. It's probably we'll do a webcast on it on another day.
I think I'm not the good thing is I'm not a scroller. Like I don't scroll for hours on like social. So it's not that I'm not doing stuff. I think sometimes because I love consuming visual things. So it's like I'm looking, and like if I'm in town, I go to London or I go to a city, I'm sort of like constantly, I'm exhausted. Like I get on the train, I feel like I'm exhausted. And it's probably exemplified since COVID, because I had a period of time where I wasn't doing that for a long time. But I'm always sort of looking. So I'm always looking. I go out with like I say, with my daughters, and we're looking, and I'm constantly sort of consuming content. So actually coming home and sort of sitting on the sofa and watching like Married at First Sight. And again, I don't like get it, but that sort of just an hour of like nothing where you don't have to sort of consume is kind of like my sort of thing. And it's like a total two sort of flips of the coin as to where I sit. Yeah. Like I say, the house, and my house, like there's sort of like two bits. Like my kitchen is like intense because that's where I like to, like this bit behind me. But this is where I am during the day. And that in the evening, I sort of move into this, it's kind of a bit more calm. And so, yeah, I think I've always been interested in like consuming sort of short, like, yeah, I've always been interested in things, the news in a way, because it's like snippets of information. So, yeah, it might be something. It'd be good to sort of one day to do some deep dive into
it's
my
interesting.
brain.
It's interesting, and it's interesting that it's sort of like, as I say, consumable kind of. You enjoy the cadence of kind of consuming things in bite-sized elements, and that real type of observational consumerism, as opposed to just constantly scrolling through things. I can totally relate to that, and I think
that's probably why I found like LinkedIn as LinkedIn is my platform, because Instagram is okay, but I really find LinkedIn as a platform for me. It's because it's content, but it's also backed up with some there's more to it. It's got some substance, and that's why I've sort of found my voice in there, because I can kind of, it's bite-sized bits of information. It's like long-form articles or anything. There are things on there, but you can kind of dive in and out. So it's this really nice balance for me of content, insights, analysis, people's thoughts and opinions. So yeah, it's funny that that's become my safe place. I've never really, Instagram is not a sort of a platform that I do stuff, but it's LinkedIn has definitely become my sort of space.
That's good. That's a really nice link into what I want to talk about next with you and get your opinion on. I know that you talk about this throughout some of your posts, and I think Shop Drop Daily, which I love, and well, I'm not the only one. I find it a great source to turn to when I'm looking at ideation or getting some inspiration around what are brands doing within that physical space. So I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the evolution of retail engagement. I think if I ask you, when you reflect on your sort of journey from shop floor to kind of more strategic roles, all the way to Shop Drop Daily, and this kind of creative passion of yours to keep that engaging and to keep that updated, how do you see the retail evolution of retail engagement through sort of immersive installations shaping the future of sort of customer interactions? How do you see it? So kind of beyond installations and pop-ups, how do you foresee retail spaces kind of further integrating elements of technology to enhance engagement without deterring people away?
It's funny because I think we're going back. The reason I fell in love with what I do, I was lucky. I dropped out of university. I was doing a fashion design course. My mum was like horrified. I think she wanted like a famous fashion designer son. But I'd always been in love. I went to university to do fashion because I thought I liked fashion. But actually on reflection, I liked the evolution of how you sort of engage consumers in brand. And I think at a time when I went to uni, that sort of didn't exist as a kind of degree. Got a job in a shop, and I sort of was lucky that I sort of found this passion for visual merchandising. And I think at the time, it was all about consumers engaging with brands and physical spaces, because the .com sort of business didn't really exist. It was there, but it wasn't. So there was this real art of storytelling to a consumer and getting them to engage. And I think what's happened probably over that sort of 20-year period, we've gone through sort of a sort of evolution of, it's all about this visual, very visceral, very tactile. Probably I was lucky to be sort of part of French Connection, which went on this huge sort of brand growth in the early sort of noughties, as fueled by their campaigns and their really clever brand. And I really understood this link between what you were talking about on a much bigger kind of global level, your campaign, your brand and all that, and then what you were doing in store, because I was merchandising FC UK hoodies, like it was, but you could see this, what they were selling at the top as this sort of dream aspirational to what I was doing in store was this huge connection. Without what was happening here, I can do my job. And it's during that sort of 20 years, we've gone on various sort of things, and then that's died off as I think what happened is brands went on this kind of like global expansion. It became very cookie cutter, and the internet and the digital side of businesses took over. So everyone was like, "Now we're going to invest in that side, and we're going to forget the stores here just to sell product." And it became very flat. Fast forward to sort of probably where we're at now. We're now sort of fighting off that pressure of the digital and really trying to unpick. And I think this is where the challenge is. And the potential real sort of where we're going is how the two things work hand in hand. They've always kind of worked in isolation. So tech and retail and the physical store and all those kind of things have always kind of worked probably like in silo. So the future is about weaving that together. So how do you get everything working in this kind of like journey across all touch points? And I think that's probably the bit where the kind of consumer interaction is really about driving out what's the purpose of the physical versus, and how does that engage the consumer, whether that's through tactile kind of touch, whether that's through senses, whether that's like it's got, but instead of it being in isolation, it's all about being part of the bigger story now. And probably like French Connection was doing in those days was they were telling a global campaign, and the store was driving that through a kind of commercial lens. That's the same now. You look at what Louis Vuitton are doing, for example, that everything is so cross-connected. So from what the fashion shoot is doing, the show to the catwalk collection, to the store, to the marketing, to the social, to the digital, to the physical. So it becomes part of this narrative versus everyone working on kind of siloed sort of pieces that try and fit together but don't have an overarching theme. So I think the future piece is all about, it's definitely more important than ever, like the way that these things link together. And it's really defining what the purpose is, and that's where the customer becomes so important. It's because it's all about understanding that consumer and delivering something that resonates with them.
It's I completely agree, and it's interesting that are we doing like a 180, or are we just continuing, or some of those brands that are doing things well continuing with the right methodology, which is paying attention to the consumer, starting with the consumer, and building a narrative, and then using that narrative across every single possible point of engagement, communication, emotional engagement. You mentioned just then Louis Vuitton. No matter whether you're fresh out on the catwalk, whether you're looking at diffusion lines in store, whether you're looking at their online presence, their physical store, their pop-ups, their shopping shops, whatever it might be, everything feels connected. Everything is resonating on that level. And maybe that is that narrative cutting through. And maybe you were already doing a French Connection 20 years ago. The difference is now you just have a sort of a much larger range of, channels, but also opportunity to tell elements of that narrative sort of motifs in a different way, whether it's through a digital expression or a technological expression. And I think maybe we're still doing it and we're still using the same methodology. We just have to think in some ways bigger, but then we have to bring that thinking back down. I don't know. That's what it kind of feels like.
It's really interesting because I think it is about thinking bigger, but actually it's then localizing that or delivering. Everything becomes more challenging. So we used French Connection 20 years ago. Everything was the same. So you would do the store. I was part of the VM team, and we would do merchandising guidelines that was consistent across every store in the globe, for example. The windows were the same. The mannequins were the same. Now we've gone, as you know, what we do in Paris has got to be different to LA. And we're going to actually in London, we're going to do this in Selfridges, but we're also going to do this in East London, Spitalfields, because so we're really going where the campaign is big, that the idea is big, but the actual way that we're going to deliver that needs to be so kind of like pinned down to the consumer in that location, because it's not a one size fits all policy anymore, because people are so into different things, and if you can quite easily find your sort of niche very easily into what you follow, the content, the influencers you follow. So a brand who's trying to be one size fits all kind of doesn't really fit anywhere because it's not got a niche. So like, yeah, Louis Vuitton's a great example, is whilst Pharrell's new campaign is kind of like a global campaign. What was happening in Tokyo was different to what happened in Selfridges in London, but that was different to what was happening in Bond Street, because the consumer in Selfridges is different to the Bond Street one. So it's kind of gone 180, but let's just throw loads more thinking into it, which becomes a challenge because it needs so much more connected thinking from the beginning. And what's really exciting for me is it used to be driven out by the campaign, for example, would drive. Now I think we're flipping it, that the story drives it, and then everything else has to follow. So what's the core kind of KPI of this campaign? So is it about selling product? Is it about engaging the consumer? And then that has to be sort of translated across all those touch points, whether that's physical, digital, technological. And that's how successful brands then immerse their consumer, because it's so kind of translated across all those. But it's a lot of plates to spin, so it's challenging.
You mentioned the magic word, immersion. You mentioned it. It is being thrown around a lot at the moment, and I think it's for good reason, for absolutely good reason. It's almost like a KPI. And not even a silent one for a lot of brands. I think one of their main goals, or one of the primary goals, is to immerse, is to create that emotional connection, so that elements of that core narrative, they're testing whether that's resonating and whether it's working. You talked about almost transcreation, global. So it's once you've nailed your narrative, it's then adapting that narrative and executing in a way that aligns to KPIs, regardless of the location. And when you're in a different location, you got to be mindful of cultural indifferences, what people value, their expectation. And you're absolutely right. When you're talking to a Mr. or Mrs. consumer that walks in Selfridges in London or New York is vastly different to those that work in Louis Vuitton, SIS or pop up in Hong Kong or Singapore or somewhere like that. So it's totally right. But I think if we think about immersion, I must read it at least 30 times a day in various different reports. And I've tried to attempt to sort of decode it once before, but I'm interested in your opinion. Like, when it comes to creating more captivating brand experiences, how would you unpack kind of the core elements that kind of define an immersive retail experience? With your experience of Shop Drop Daily, I mean, you must have seen so many different attempts, examples, how brands are trying to create that more immersive experience. What would be your approach to shaping it?
It's difficult because I think immersion means so much to different people. So immersion means, I think that's the thing. Probably 5 years ago, or even post-COVID, everyone thought the immersive thing was about technology. We had to have like a digital, we will have to walk into a digital box. That's the only way we're going to get immersed in a brand, is to be like fully immersed in technology. Technology plays a huge part in immersive experiences, but actually what does immersiveness mean to the brand? For example, how are you creating for me, immersive means creating an authentic dialogue with a consumer. And there's no point putting someone into a situation or a location that's super high tech if that's not relevant for the brand or the consumer. And I think we also hold probably the most powerful piece of technology in our hands, and probably at some point, because of Apple's Vision goggles, we'll all be wearing them on our heads. But we're fully immersed. I think when I sort of talk about immersive experiences, and that sort of was part of Shock Drop, really, was to start to look at what are brands doing to immerse their consumer and their customer or their audience. And it goes back to that word KPI again. Like, for me, the point of it is how you create that thing that really drives out a connection, a personal connection with the consumer. So whether you're Barbie, for example, and I took my kids to the Barbie stuff, all the pop-ups that were happening for Barbie, you got immersed in the world of Barbie. The movie, you felt like you were Barbie or Ken or anyone in that film. But then I went to, there was an ice cream pop-up for in the summer, and that was all about immersing you in the flavour and but then you can go down the road to the Outnet or what Flannels X are doing on Oxford Street, and you go to the basement, and then suddenly you're in this. I was in this Beyonce concert, and she'd got this big disco ball pony in there, horse, and it's like fully digital. So you'd kind of felt like you were in her like world, and it was so within 3 sort of like different examples, I was immersed in so many different ways. So, but they all felt relevant. They felt so like connected to what they were talking about, and I think that's the most important thing.
And that's interesting that immersion doesn't necessarily mean or equate to technology, and I think that's where that might be part of this whole decoding thing, is that when people think immersion, they think of maybe the Van Gogh display, which is just lots and lots of screens moving around, reflective surfaces that are kind of somewhat kinetic and responsive to your movement. But it's not just about the technology, is it? It's about everything else. It's about the material. It's about the sound. It's about the scent. It's about all those different aspects. And when you get them just right, like you've just mentioned three examples, when you get them just right, they have an impact, which becomes a positive association, worthy of discussion, worthy of talking to people, which then becomes this kind of social positive currency. And that's exactly what you're doing now. You're sharing them because they were memorable, because you felt immersed. And it didn't necessarily have anything to do with a specific technology. It was more about just the environment.
Yeah. And I think it's probably, while it's about embracing technology for the purpose and for how that drives out this piece. So there is a simple QR code, like, it's mad how something like a QR code has now become part of an immersive experience. So you could like scan something and learn about a product, whether it's something you hold over and it comes to life on the device that you've got, whether it's something you walk into and you're kind of like immersed through digital kind of content, whether it's a selfie booth, that's something as simple as that you get actually it prints you out a little tangible Polaroid picture. Like, yeah, definitely. I think the retail experience has gone on this very non-digital. It was very visual merchandising and mannequins and props, and it was very window display. Then we went on this period where we're going, actually, guys, we're not doing any of that. We're just going to fill the stores with digital. So we're going to replace things with digital screens. We're going to put iPads into the stores. We're going to have digital walls. We're going to put digital things in the window. See you later, visual merchandisers. We don't need that storytelling. Now we're going, hey guys, actually we need the storytelling. We also need the visceral content, and we need the digital integration. So you're spinning a lot of plates now, but the point is to make them. Again, it goes back to that first point: is there's no point doing that unless there's a connected resonance between all of them, and they feel relevant to the consumer. Like, I went to the Gucci stuff at 180 The Strand. Is the perfect place that you have these like digital immersive experiences, because it felt right for the brand. But I went to a skincare pop up with my daughter. She's 12, and it's based on teenage, so they're super into TikTok like that, and they don't need the fully fledged digital immersion. They don't need to be immersive, but the technology was about learning about makeup tutorials, and so they went into like a booth and they would do tutorials. So they're all immersive experiences, but they're sort of polars apart. And I think everyone sort of sits down, and I was talking to someone about it the other day actually, and they go, right, guys, we want to do an immersive. This needs to be really immersive. And you're like, But what do you mean by that? What does that actually mean for you? Yeah, and it's funny because there's a lot of talk a minute about that Willy Wonka thing that's gone terrible here in the UK. I don't know if you've seen, but there was a Willy Wonka experience, and it was sold as an immersive experience, and it's a bit like Firefest. It's the Firefest for the UK at the moment because it was sold as this fully immersive experience, and when people turned up, it was some props in a shed. So,
oh god,
again, it was a bit of a like the way they advertised it versus what happened. And I think there were some things that didn't kind of like cross-pollinate in the middle. But again, it's kind of like it was sold as this immersive experience. What does that mean? Does that mean you can go and have a selfie with some prop? Like, immersive experiences means it's kind of such a wide point now.
Yeah, and it's almost as if part of curating that immersive experience, part of that approach needs to be, what do we want people to feel, think, and see and touch when they're here, and then when they leave? That almost, because I mean, maybe the Willy Wonka one, if they'd taken that kind of approach, it might not have been such a letdown to so many people. But I think you're right. It's still, I don't think we're going to decode it here in the next 15, 20 minutes. But I think you're absolutely right. Immersion means different things depending upon what that brand is trying to achieve, what type of connection they're trying to create with their audience. It can be a disappointment. At the same time, it can be something incredible that you can share an experience with your daughter, and both of you get something out of it. And you talked about as well that, it's not just about technology, and it goes back to that original point that it's about the narrative and it's about what are we trying to achieve, and then how does technology kind of, in a way, elegantly assist or help to enhance what we're trying to achieve. So we've kind of gone through this kind of, it's not really an evolution. It's neither a revolution. It's almost just we started off with kind of props and static visuals, and then came this sort of the implode of kind of digital screens and text. Now everyone wants to throw that everywhere, and now we're almost this kind of impasse where we're trying to figure our way through, and find out how does it all kind of come together. And I guess that kind of leads on to the next buzzword that everybody loves to use, innovation. And I think, it's less about innovation. I want to talk more about curation and curating effective campaigns, that actually resonate. And I guess again that it's almost like you've answered it, which is it depends what you're trying to achieve. But I think if we look at you are almost creating kind of mini campaigns around Shop Drop Daily. There's this almost constant campaign actually, which is what's going on out there, or perhaps you think of it as something different. But I think if you reflect for a minute, what do you think one trend is that you can predict, when hold it to you, I'll hold you to it, that will significantly influence kind of this kind of retail innovation or evolution over the next few years?
I think it's definitely going back to this sort of more visceral. It's enhancing the visceral nature, like the retail, the physical thing is finding its feet again as a platform. It's got to be thought about, and I think that's part of my sort of prediction, is that the physical store will become less of a transactional space, and it will become a platform for this curation. Like, I've always loved what Dover Street Market do, because it's like they curate that store for a purpose to inspire the consumer into. You go on a sort of journey when you go in there, and it's a journey of exploration. And I think it's this, how the physical environment cross-pollinates with this rest of this wider, when you're never going to compete as a brand with the likes of Amazon, for example, in terms of operational delivery. If you want something and you want to buy it and you want it delivered and you want it the next day or even within so many hours, you go to Amazon or an equivalent, because that delivers a functional form for you. but it doesn't deliver anything other in terms of experience, because I don't get excited if a brown box turns up. There's nothing. It's not even excited to open it. The whole thing is not, but it's not designed to be that. And I think if brands can start to understand that they have got this huge platform across all their consumer touch points to deliver an emotional connection, and I sort of call them like moments that matter. So as soon as they really unpick that would be for me is this huge sort of driving point to the next bit. So every time you touch that brand, whether it's in physical retail, whether it's through a pop-up, whether it's through so you get physically through the door. I love it that things like newspapers are coming back. So like brands are using these like little zines and things to start to be more physical and tactile, that you kind of start to pick up these things and you begin to connect with a brand. And that's the same through tech. Like as long as the tech is there and it's driving a point and a purpose, that's for me where we're sort of going. And I think that the trend will be, if you're just going to open the doors to a store and expect people to come and just pick up product, unless you're Primark. And I think Primark is a kind of, but they're doing things. They're like adding things into like hairdryer blow bars and nail bars, and they're putting Greggs in there, like coffee shops too, because it's more than just shopping. It's an experience. So unless the trend will go, and it won't be about sort of creating showcases in terms of them being showrooms. It's a platform of a physical space that definitely engages in a purpose, whether it's to talk about a product, whether it's to talk about a new collaboration, whether it's to, there's so much that you can't do online through digital that you have to go and touch and see, like, and that's the point for me. That'll be the trend. So I'm seeing it already. That was the point of Shop Drop. The point of Shop Drop was to start curating, I suppose, a platform of activations that probably spoke differently to what other, and I don't really like the word retail experts because I don't try and put myself in that, but of other retail experts were talking about. They were talking about Amazon Go as like the future of store concepts and other sort of what I would call more functional things. And I was like, it's great. I love all this technology, and I love the fact that stores, it's about convenience and it's about, but I don't know, it doesn't drive out that. And that goes back to those heady days of French Connection. Like you would stack all these hoodies on the wall and they would sell out within like 2 hours because people were so engaged with that brand that they had to come to the store, they wanted to buy it and engage with that brand. And that still stands now. So the trend hasn't changed. It's how that's molded again to the consumer and to the brand. So yeah, it's the trend for me, and the word I use is definitely like curating spaces that matter. And I think that will be it. I
like that, curating spaces that matter. I heard it's not the same, but I heard something like connecting through lifestyle, and it's kind of you're right. It's not about creating, or going with the whole idea that every space needs to be a showroom, but it's about understanding those areas that connect with people and creating an environment where that can actually happen quite naturally and it's not being pushed or forced. And I think you're right. It's kind of, but this whole conversation around trying to balance high tech with high touch and trying to figure out how does that balance, and it's sort of quite a delicate interplay. I think, if you think about everything you've seen on Shop Drop that you've put on there, can you give us an example? Either something that you've been involved in firsthand, maybe in French Connection, maybe it was something further back before the kind of digital explosion, or something now where kind of world-class example where that balance of high tech with touch was struck kind of perfectly, creating a pretty memorable experience for the majority. Is there one that stands out to you? Why it worked?
There's probably one of them. So, and I use Louis Vuitton a lot, but they get it so right because it's about this cross connection, and that was the point of doing a lot of Shop Drop, is to say you don't need to be Louis Vuitton to do this, but you need to think like LV, like that. This kind of, but they've just done a sort of partnership in Dubai with the Atlantis Royal Hotel. And what I love about it is that it's got this cross-pollination between AR, so you can go there and you can they've brought their little character to life, and there's sculpt art. There is actual physical art sculptures in the hotel, but you can also see those digitally. You can collect stamps, so every time you go there, if you stay there, you get like a stamps, and you collect those, and it feels this really nice balance between physical, like you have to physically go to the hotel, you have to be part of that exclusive club to be there, but you can also engage with it digitally. So it's through kind of like digital filters, there's AR interactions, and so it feels kind of relevant, but it also feels kind of attainable. But I also love what brands are now doing. So like Burberry's takeover at Harrods, and I loved how it was Burberry and Harrods, and they'd done this great takeover of the exterior of the store. But then they recreated that in Roblox. Like, it's so cool. And I'm 42, I shouldn't be like saying how cool Roblox is, but I love the fact. And I was playing with the kids, and we could go into Harrods, and I was like, oh my God, it's literally Harrods in Roblox. And then you'd go and play these games to collect like coins or coffee cups to jump around, to then exchange for Burberry product in Roblox. And then you could also then buy Burberry product with Roblox. It's like such a great cross connection. And I love that it's that simple connection with tech. But I think, again, it's like, what's the, like, I love sometimes I posted a picture on my Instagram the other day of a cool digital wall, because it works so perfectly with a mannequin in front of it. So sometimes it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It just has to be someone's gone, okay, this is the content we need to make it work with the physical. And I think it probably goes back to those times where we cleared out all of the creativity and we started to fill it with screens and tech. And we just put content on there. And what broke my heart for about 5 years is that we put digital screens in the window and then filled it with static content. So it was like, okay, guys, we're going to put this digital content in there, but we haven't actually got any sort of moving content to do it. So we're going to put our campaign shoot on there. And you're like, okay, great. So we've now got a digital screen with static content. Okay, maybe it does a slideshow and it sort of shows the next, but it doesn't engage. Like, what's the point of this? And what I love now, how even like a brand like Hermès are using tech as probably like a backdrop to their physical stuff. So they may have like this cool like underwater texture, and then in front of that they then create the theater. So I don't know whether it's some fishes are like but beautifully crafted sort of like fish, but then the backdrop is all moving. So we're now working, it's how they work hand in hand. And I think that's the real sweet spot now of like someone going, we've got this digital screen in the store. How does that work with what we're now talking about? And I think that's why somewhere, and I love in what's happened at the Outernet, and they did a pop-up with On Running, is this entire sort of pop-up, the space of the Outernet in London is digital. So it's like fully immersive, but then On had this kind of like physical thing in the middle, and the two things just work really nicely together. And I think it's that balance, definitely that balance.
I too felt that kind of disappointment when you can clearly see people are trying to use the technology and you're seeing nothing captivating, nothing dynamic or borderline dynamic. But you're absolutely right. It's getting it's using elements. It's kind of it's getting more creative, isn't it? With the choice of mediums and materials that you have. It should be an extremely exciting time as opposed to a confusing time for brands, you know. But I guess it comes back to that same element again, which is how could you possibly know how to use it without that story?
Yeah.
And I know we talked about kind of narrative and making sure that narrative's there, but how, I mean, in your experience, having worked with brands, probably interviewed brands, seen so many different executions, how does effective narrative-driven design contribute to kind of building a brand's identity, customer journey within the physical space? Where have you seen it work really well? Or where have you seen the evidence? Or have you been at close working with somebody before where they've nailed it?
Yeah, and they're like, to be honest, the sportswear brands, Adi, Nike, they're fantastic at driving out these cross-connected stories, and they use their physical to talk about that, to show the styling of that campaign, for example, in a certain with local nuances. So what I love is how London and the styling there is very different to Paris, but the general, obviously they're talking about a product or a period of time or an athlete. Or what's really interesting to see is the whole of that sort of narrative has been thought about at the beginning. And what the reason those screens was filled with static content is because the thought process has gone from, let's build a campaign. So we're going to go and shoot that campaign. And here's all the assets. Oh, okay, now we've done the campaign. Now you've got to sort of try and retrofit everything into what you've done. The likes of Nike, Adi, the big, and Burberry, like the ones I'm sort of talking about, Louis Vuitton, those sort of brands, anyone who talks as a brand, I would say, has this great cross-connected. So, and I think that's where the role of perhaps like the creative director has changed, and probably someone like Virgil from when he was with Louis Vuitton. His role wasn't to kind of craft a creative, as in a product. He wasn't the designer. He was kind of curating this bigger brand expression, and so which everything then had to cross-pollinate, because the vision wasn't about just the product. It was about this kind of global expression. You can start to see how that's beginning to work its way down into this sort of storytelling, that it's got to be thought about at the beginning. Because if you don't think about it at the beginning, when you come to execute the digital, for example, or the pop-up, or the whatever that is, the coffee cup that you probably need because if you're going to do a coffee experience, you need to think about that at the beginning. Because if you haven't got the assets, if you haven't thought about the colors, the textures, the smells at the beginning, everything feels a bit sort of like secondary or sort of half-hearted. And you can definitely see that the best experiences have been conceived as a campaign at the beginning, rather than as a traditional fashion shoot. So, and I've worked at brands where we've conceived it as a campaign. So you would shoot the campaign, you go, right, hey guys, creative director, here's our campaign. Now you need to try and facilitate that across the physical store or the pop-up experience or the digital channels. So you always kind of retrofitted, but the way, which is kind of where I sort of sit now with what I do in a day job, which is about kind of questioning that thought processes up front, so that when you come down to figuring out what you're going to put on that digital screen, you've pretty much answered that before you've had to answer it. And that's where the challenge is. If I sort of talk about traditional retailers, they are changing, but they're big challenges. And I worked at Arcadia and I was at Top Man, and the challenge with that is everything was thought about in silo. So marketing would do their marketing, digital would do digital and focus on their channels. VM would focus on the windows and in-store experience. Retail would deliver the kind of operational excellence. You kind of cross-connected, but it was very sort of like regimented. So we were doing what we were doing in store, and social and digital were doing what they were doing, and web was doing what they were doing online. So there wasn't this kind of like what I call like a red thread. That it wasn't very sort of joined up. It somehow did, but it didn't have this really consistency. So sort of we flipped on probably 10 years to now, where the consumer's so savvy. Like, and I use my daughter who's 12 a lot because she knows about those Nike trainers before she even walks into the store. So if she knows what she wants, she's seen her favorite sort of influencer wearing it. She knows if Taylor Swift has touched it, for example. She is more savvy and switched on, and that generation, and because we've got that, we are armed with information. So if the experience post that piece of information doesn't really add any value, then it feels a bit kind of contrived. It's so important that everything is thought about at the beginning, which is a challenge. It's a real challenge for businesses to rethink that way.
But it makes complete sense, doesn't it? And it almost takes the or at least reduces the confusion later on. You know, if you've got a compelling story, and then you're given a space to start to tell that story. As long as you remain connected and that narrative kind of follows through, of course you'll make mistakes, but there's a good chance that you're going to resonate, and that's going to support or reinforce your brand's identity, create better customer journeys, no matter where you are on that sort of cross-connected sort of ecosystem that you're talking about. No matter where a customer, wherever in the world, as long as you're sticking with that core narrative and then kind of allowing it to branch off and execute in the right way, treating technology as kind of a vehicle to great content, to great thinking, great ideas, you're going to get there, right? As long as you keep that together and you remain kind of true to that story, it kind of feels like you'll get there in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's not worrying too much about what, where, and how. It's always why. Why are you doing this thing? Why is this going to be important to your audience? And that's why I reference, and the point of Shop Drop was to always go and say, look, all of these things have a why. Like, they're all doing them for a purpose. Whether you're spending 1.5 million or £10,000, the money doesn't define what you're doing. The amount of tech that you're putting in it, how big it is, those things don't define. They obviously can help amplify why are you doing this and why is it important to your audience. And that's where then you start to bolt on things like you're saying. Whether do we need to put an AR experience? Does it need to have digital? Do we need to immerse our consumer as they walk through into it? What are they? Where are they sort of consuming content? Do we need that in there? It's less now around the conversation has always started with what are we going to do to sell this product? The question now is why are we going to do why do we need this space, or what's the purpose of these activations to engage the consumer? Like, it's sort of flipping that conversation slightly, and it's definitely going back to the beginning. You always sort of fixing a problem they were sort of up to a requirement for doing something. Now it's okay. Well, we need to take that and do something with it. Why?
Yeah, it's almost like, what do we do with this? And now we're saying, or what do we do with this product, or what do we do with this tech or this range or whatever it might be? And now it's almost asking us before we start to think, why are we doing this? You know, why are we going down this road? Why are we telling this story? Why are we doing this campaign? Why are we doing this to the store? And I think that's right. I mean, so when you think about this kind of ecosystem that we talked about, this kind of cross-connected ecosystem, this basically huge opportunity, significant opportunity that brands have these days. And I know, yes, it can be confusing, but as long as we remain to start with why, we keep to a strong narrative. What do we think the role of the physical store is going to develop into? Is it there today already?
I think it depends who you are. This is why have you got a store? So there's we're moving into a world where what's really exciting is digital natives are now moving into IRL, and which kind of blows the whole thing up again. The challenge for digital natives is I think they're moving into a world where they're meeting people who are trying to force them down a predetermined route, because they're saying, guys, this is how you do retail. Retail is this. And so I think there's a lot of predetermined pieces on this is retail. You need fixtures. You need mannequins. You need to hold stock in there. You need a stock room. My question is, do you? Why? Like, why do you need that? And I think that we're in this period, I call it, it's a murky, confused period, because it's super exciting because the future of retail has a position, but it kind of needs someone to embrace what that is, or even to challenge what that is. And there are people that are doing it. There are brands that are doing it. And even some of the big players are just beginning to challenge what that is. The problem is it comes with huge sort of legacy. So you've got to make you've got to drive sales because you're paying a rent. You've got to hold stock because that drives the sale. So the challenge at the minute is to redefine so much thinking internally, because the first question when I talk to a lot of brands, when they talk about opening a store, is they go, okay, well, the rent is this. So we need to sell X amount of product. So we need to hold X amount of product. We need a stock room then to fit all that product. And then you go, well, you're opening a store. Like, it is a store. Whether you talk about whether that's the future of retail, it's still a shop that holds product. You have to do £12,000 a week or whatever that is to drive that being there. And that's always going to be the challenge until someone says, hey guys, look, the store for us is not, we have to make, obviously it has to be commercially viable. But maybe we'll do that. That's whether that drives sales to our digital channels, whether that's about driving social engagement. What's the value these days? What's the currency of retail? Is it cash? Ultimately, it probably is, because you need that to keep the lights on. But should that be the first question when you open a store? And lots of that digital, like Gymshark are moving into physical retail. Lots of these brands are moving into and sort of seeing the opportunity of physical retail. But I think the first question they're probably looking at is, how do we keep the lights on in a store? So we've got to generate X amount of sales. My question would be, how can we as an industry begin to flip that narrative? Because otherwise we're going to have another 10 to 15 years of shops just filled with stock. You're never going to hold as much stock as you can digitally or in your on a digital storefront. But also, does that define an experience? Am I getting the experience when I come in and have to swipe through racks of clothes? I can do that at home on my computer. I can go through 27,000 different hoodies on the internet. What I can't do on the internet is try that on. I can't touch it. I can't learn about the fabric. I can't understand the benefits of it. I can't see how to wear it or style it. All of those things. So it's that heady balance between how you kind of drive out the commercial success, but also balance that with what I see where retail probably needs to go. Because as things get more improved in terms of technological, in fact, we all get next day delivery, and I know things where we're kind of now trying to push against that, and again, that's where the store helps. It's a space where you can collect it, you can try it on, you can engage with the product. Whether it has to hold 27,000 pairs of jeans, I don't know. That's pretty much where I sit. And that's probably the anti-version of what French Connection was. I love French Connection because it was the home of, you had to go there to get those hoodies and those T-shirts. You couldn't get them anywhere else because they didn't have a .com business. Now it's flipped. So, but you could if you flip that around, French Connection you came to that store, that you would be embroiled in the brand, for example, in the story. So yeah, I think it's a kind of it's easy for me to say as kind of a creative person to go, right, we need to pull all the product out and create these immersive experiences, because financially it's not going to work. So the future is definitely this very good balance between creativity and commerciality. But it's putting it, what also is, the more I dig into it, and it's why like a brand, perhaps it's easier for a big brand to kind of put all of the commercial acumen on, and the sort of success of the commercial side of the business into one big pot of money. Whereas at the moment, everything is thought about very silo. So the store has to be commercially successful because it's got a target, an individual target for each store. But who's saying that store doesn't drive sales to the website? Like, nothing's thought about. It's back to that cross connection.
Exactly. Yeah.
And everything's thought about in silo. So
yeah, no, you're right. And I'm fascinated by what you said. There was something that maybe the narrative needs to flip, but we have to do it with caution, So, okay, so you speak to somebody immediately when you go and consult or speak to, we want to open a store. Okay, but the first thing they think about is, well, how much stock do we need to be holding? How many transactions do we need to do? Because we need to pay for the lease and we need to pay for the physical space. But then we're also seeing digital native brands coming into the physical space, and they are doing it differently. Although they're selling the product, and they're obviously logic is, when you're in the store, you're getting something becomes tangible. The product now becomes tangible, but they're definitely they're definitely first to think of, how do we use the space? What's the role of it that we want to create here? And they almost think differently. And whether it's because they've started off with all this kind of additional insight, because they follow people online, they know where they dwell, they're kind of familiar with their culture, their likes, dislikes, how they communicate, what their online presence is like, and they kind of mastered that first before they went into that physical space. So you kind of have to ask yourself, do they have the right blueprint, or are they closer to it?
They also find the challenge. What's really interesting, the more time I spend with the digital native, is how frustrating they find retail, because it's so fixed. So these are businesses that have been born from a bedroom on Squarespace or on Wix. Like, they've created a business from their laptop. Let's just talk about that. And if they want to drive a campaign and flip a campaign on, they can do that today. They can build the content. They can change the digital content. They can flip everything on and off, switch a button. And when it comes to physical retail, it's like, oh my God, this is so fixed. Like, everything is really difficult, because we've got to sign a lease for 5 years. We've got to build everything has to be really hard fixed. And it's like, so again, as a sort of person, my sort of role in trying to help unpick the future of retail is like, how do you get that same level of being able to just switch this thing on and change that's where, again, technology's role is, I think, in the physical sort of the world, is how can you go from being about this today and something else tomorrow, because retail doesn't have that sort of flexibility at the moment. So again, when you begin to think about the physical space, it needs to have walls, and it needs to have air conditioning, it needs to have a floor. But actually, how do you start to break up the rules that you have to have folded product on the wall or wall base? That's why I love someone like an On Running. They've got this like robotic arm as you walk in the store, and it picks up a trainer and it shows you the different ways that the athletes wear the trainer and how it bends. And they've like devoted half of the shop to that. But it's a kind of new way of thinking about space that it's really interesting that this sort of period in time, that the rule book is definitely for kind of ripping up, or maybe not all of it, because we've been retailing for hundreds of years, so we obviously know what we're doing. We've not really been long enough in this kind of cross-connected world And I think it's going to be even more like as soon as you buy on TikTok, like every channel now has a sort of purchasing ability. So the store is just another one of those channels. And I think that until we start to really understand how that works, then the rule book is totally for redefining.
A really good cliffhanger to leave that on, or a really good final thing to say, because I think you're right. Tim. It's there is a rule book, and although there are still certain rules that we feel like we need to follow because they're costs, they're almost unavoidable, unless some clever person can come up with a way that we can circulate that entire thing without ever really having to spend that money and just focus on pure almost expressionism and focusing on it driving emotional connections, and let that retail space come into its own thing naturally. I think you're right. The rule book's still there. Maybe we can't throw it away entirely. Maybe we need to keep elements of it. But I think what I've spent this last hour with you chatting, there's so many different things that you said that I want to try and capture, and the edit will do that for me. But some of the things that really resonate with me is there is a common theme throughout most of these conversations that I'm having, which is narrative is so important. The story that you're trying to tell helps then to define the role of the store that you're actually leasing, owning. It will help you, that story will help you to recognize how we're going to do this, what we're going to do with this space, what is the KPI that we want to smash within this particular channel, this role. The store has its role, it is also the channel. Balancing, everything seems to be a balancing game. Everything's a dance. Not one thing, but the whole thing is a balance of technology, emotional connection, story, product merchandise, high touch versus low touch. Everything is a balance. So although there's this huge capability and opportunity to do so many different things, the whole thing is a balancing act. And as you put it right there at the end, which is absolutely true, we've been in retail for a few hundred years and we know how to do it, but we've now got to do it differently. And we're doing it in a world which offers a huge amount more opportunity. But it's almost like I see that head of retail, if I were to visualize that, looking up at this kind of big world of opportunity away, and behind is kind of the resale store of the past. He's sort of all putting it in his pocket and going, okay, it's a brave new world. They're just kind of stepping forward, and that's kind of what it feels like it is.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's funny because that's where I think I found my niche or my voice. It's insane. I get some like messages into my LinkedIn inbox and people, and it's like, what do we do? Would be the question. How do we do this? What should we do? How do we embrace this new future? And my question is, it always is the same. It's like, what are you trying to achieve? Let's go right. Let's just dig. If you can give me one sentence, because there's loads of things that brands want to do. We want to do this. We want to engage the consumer. We want to connect. You kind of go, well, what is the one intrinsic thing that we need to do for you here? And then we can define the narrative, because why are we doing this? Like, because everything else can then be figured out. We can then it becomes a mad spider diagram. You start here and you're like, you can do this, you can do that, you can do that, you can do that. So the kind of retail ecosphere is huge now. Whereas when I was back in brand and I was doing it, you kind of was like, okay, we've got this. Well, we need to do a window display would be where I would get involved, or a VM. How do we VM this? How do we window display it? And then it might end up online on like a header page or something, and there'd be some POS. Now it's like, okay, that's just one tiny little part of what we're talking about now. What else are we doing? How does this it's all about the emotional connection. I think that goes back to this whole thing with Amazon. Like, you want otherwise you might as well just get the consumer to buy it online and have it delivered to their door. Because you're not giving, what are you doing to add more value to that transaction? And is it a transaction? That it's funny because I'm like I answer questions and then ask questions. It's because that's the point. Like, is this about transactions? Is it just about getting people to wear the product? Is it about social sharing? Like, I struggled during COVID because I did this sort of weird video once, and I think it must have been having some sort of breakdown, but I was like stressing because I couldn't buy a coat, and it was a period of time when you were allowed to go outside, but you couldn't go to the shop so that you could meet someone for a walk. It was that sort of weird time. And I found buying a coat really difficult and I was like, have I got to get, I have an emotional connection to a coat because it's like, it's warm and it zips up and you can't just sort of buy one. Maybe that's just me, but it kind of showed you how emotionally connected you can get to like a product. And I think that's probably where I've got to with asking these questions is like, right, what are we as retail experts? How can we help unpick these very individual nuances that everyone has? And it's fascinating. It's so exciting, but it's definitely not easy.
I agree.
And there's no answer. There's definitely no answer. I can't sort of tell you one person that's doing it, which is cool. Like that's cool. I think we're in 2024, and so that means that potentially I've got a job now for a while.
Well, Tim, I think we've got to end things there. But Simon Sinek,
yeah.
Start with why. I know why can we come up with it? But different context, but it's more about yourself. But this is very much it again, isn't it? Is why are we doing this, and then what is the point? Do you want to be Amazon, or do you want to be something else? And what is that something else you want to be?
Yeah, and like I say, I think it's okay if you want to be Amazon. That's great. Nail that thing and do it amazingly well. But if you want to be driving this thing with a brand, then do it another way.
That's awesome. Tim, it's been great chatting with you, and I hope we can catch up again in
brilliant.
Maybe a few months' time. Let's see halfway through the next sort of couple of quarters of 2024 and see what's changed and see what's happening. See if there's more. No doubt you'll be fueling Shop Drop Daily with further content, and I do implore anybody that's listening to this to do visit that site for some inspiration and some insights into what's happening out there. And don't forget to think like LV.
That's it.
Think like LV.
You don't have to be LV. You don't have to spend the money that they're doing, but just think that intrinsic way of cross-connected is the way forward.
That's awesome. Tim, thank you so much for your time. It's been a
Brilliant.
pleasure.
Thank you very much. Cheers.